This article is called Revisiting the Harem Conspiracy and Death of Ramses III. It's anthropological and forensic and radiological and genetic study. So we're going to actually get the DNA of Ramses himself. Ramses was found to carry the DNA haplogroup E1B1A, and all the STRs regarding his DNA was published by Dr. Zahi Hawass, head of Egyptian Antiquity in the British Medical Journal. And so we see there his DNA is E1B1A, which is specifically sub-Saharan African. So he's not just African, he's sub-Saharan African. A lot of people like to say that the Egyptians were more Somalian-like or East African from the Horn of Africa, but this genetic study of Ramses specifies that he was actually sub-Saharan. So we're going to get into a look at other Egyptian pharaohs from the Armana Dynasty. And this is the ancestry and pathology in King Tutankhamun's family by the JAMA Network. So we're going to read this article, take a look at it, and see exactly what this article can tell us. Ancestry and pathology in King Tutankhamun's family. And right here we're looking at the different alleles and the microsatellite data and information of Thuyah, Uyah, Amenhotep, there's Tutankhamun. So different people within the 18th dynasty. So what we're looking at here is microsatellite data of mummies thought to belong to the Tutankhamun kindred. Then we go to DNA Tribes, which actually took that information and they put it in their software. And what they did was they tracked those STRs into other groups within the world. And what they found was that in certain world regions, what they found was when they took that information and converted it in their software, they found that in certain regions that their STRs and their microsatellite data was closely related to people in Pacific regions such as Southern Africa, which they put at an average of 326.94%. The African Great Lakes, 323. Tropical West Africa, which was at 83. The Sahelian, which was at 14. They even went down as far as Northwest Europe, which was at 5%. And they had North Africa at 4%. So the greatest averages were in South Africa, the African Great Lakes, and tropical West Africa. So if that's the Y-DNA of people like Ramses the Great, if you have, E1B1A, which is sub-Saharan African, and you have the STRs and the alleles of the Armana Dynasty, the 18th dynasty, as far back as Tutankhamun, I went to look at the actual indigenous people of the Middle East. And what I found that there was a indigenous people called the Natuvians. And in this age, there is an indigenous people in the region of Palestine, and they built Jericho, and they're called the Natuvians. So I want to look at their DNA. And so I read here, it says haplogroup E1B1B, which is specific to a lot of Africans. It says it's formerly known as E3B, presents the last major direct migration from Africa into Europe. It is believed to have first appeared in the Horn of Africa approximately 26,000 years ago and dispersed to North Africa and the Near East during the late Paleolithic and Mesolithic periods. EM78 and EZ827 originated respectively at 20,000 years and 24,000 years. E1B1B lineages are closely linked to the diffusion of Afro-Asiatic languages. So let's talk about the Natuvians. It says tested Lazaridis. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that word right. Forgive me for not pronouncing it right. But Lazaridis tested the first ancient DNA samples from the Mesolithic Natuvian culture in Israel and found that the male individuals belong to either groups CT or E1B1, including 2 E1B1B2 samples. So we have the Natuvian culture in Israel, and their DNA, their haplogroups were CT or E1B1, including 2 E1B1B1B2 samples. So they have DNA that originated in the Horn of Africa. So let's actually take a look at just who were the Natuvian people. So when we look at the Natuvian culture, it says that the Natuvian culture that existed from around 12,000 to 9,500 BC. We have another date, 13,000 to 7,550 BC, and that's in the Middle East. It says, it goes down to say that the Natuvian community may be the ancestors of the builders of the first Neolithic settlements of the region, which may have been the earliest in the world, actually. So Natuvians actually founded a settlement called Jericho, where Jericho is today, which may therefore be the longest continuous inhabited urban area on Earth. So these were people that founded the area of Jericho. These are people of Canaan, people in the Bible. They're the indigenous people, and they're carrying the DNA or the genetic marker E1B1B. So they're carrying East African DNA, or DNA that came out of the Horn of Africa. As you can see, E35, there's different subtraits that they carry. We can look here. There's a photo, also an image of the recent DNA study finds. Recent DNA study finds clear African DNA elements among the ancient Natuvians and others of the Palestine-Israel region. It goes down to, you see the E1B1B2, you see the E1B1B2A, you see the E1B1B2B, you see E1B1. So different genetic markers and different haplogroups that originated out of the region of Africa, specifically the Horn of Africa. So this is important to, again, the identity of Israel. You see the migration routes. That's EM35. You see EM78, EM81, EM34. So we're looking at the migration of those haplogroups. And this is actually a photo here and from that region and from that Natuvian culture. It's a recreation or restructuring. So again, when looking at that, let's actually look into the Torah, look into the scriptures and see what the scripture says. In Lamentations 4:8, the scripture says, "But now their faces are blacker than soot. No one recognizes them in the streets. Their skin sticks to their bones." It says, "Now their appearance is blacker than soot. They are not recognized in the streets. Their skin is shriveled to the bones, and it has become dry as a stick." And that is actually a picture of a child that is stricken by heat and famine, and his skin or her skin is black as soot. It says in Lamentations 4:8, "Their visage is blacker than coal. They are not known in the streets. Their skin cleaveth to their bones. It is withered. It has become like a stick." And then going back to that image, you can see that the skin is black as soot. It's black as coal, stick it to the bone. So that's an image of heat. Job 30:30, it says, "My skin is black upon me, and my bones are burnt with heat." So under intense heat and famine, the people of God, as they say up here, it says our skin was black like an oven because of the terrible famine. So when there was a terrible famine, or whenever there was intense heat, even with Job, they appeared as black as coal or as black as soot. And you can see that within that photo of that young child, is that child is extremely melanated. It's extremely dark. Skin is black as an oven or as black as soot. And you can see that the skin is dried to the bone, shriveled to the bone. So that's an actual representation. So when taking into account of the genetic evidence that we have and what the scriptures are saying, then we can kind of get a better understanding of just what is the genetic composition or the genetic makeup of the Jewish people or the ancient Israelites. So when speaking specifically about the identity of the Jewish people or the ancient Israelite people, the DNA, the genetic composition of these people, we're looking at two different African genes or two types of African haplogroups. Specifically in Egypt, when you're dealing with the E1B1A, and then you're dealing with the actual Mashubian and Natuvian DNA in the indigenous people of Palestine, and they have E1B1B or E1B. So let's actually look at the Cohen model, which actual Jewish genetics is based on, the J haplogroup. So there's something I noticed, and I was looking up the Mycenaeans and the Minoans, and I'm going to go to an article because I noticed that a lot of their culture, a lot of even their hairstyle kind of resembles the modern Jewish people, or the Ashkenaz and the Sephardim Jewish communities. And I wanted to know if their DNA traces back to Anatolia or Turkey, and if there's a J marker among the ancient Greeks, because J originates in Turkey, and they have this similarity between both cultures. So I pulled up this article. It's called Nature, the Nature article, Genetic Origins of the Minoans and the Mycenaeans. And in this article, it talks about the origins of the Bronze Age Minoan and Mycenaean cultures. And it says we have assembled genome wide data from 19 ancient individuals, including Minoans from Crete, Minoans from mainland Greece, and so on and so on. And it says 3/4 of their ancestry from the first Neolithic farmers of Western Anatolia, which is Turkey. So as we keep looking, there's another article. It's called "The So-Called Minoans Were the Philistines." So it's making or creating a bridge or link between the Greek Minoans and the people of Philistine, the Philistinian or the Palestinians of today, and the Philistines of of before. So it's making a clear distinction and connection. It's making a clear connection between the two groups genetically. It said Wahalagu J2A M410 was scarce. It says showed a high frequency of J2A M410 and low frequency of J2 M12. So there's a high frequency. The Macedonian group didn't show high frequency of J2A M42, but Greek like Anatolian. So we see that there's different frequencies of different haplogroups like J2B M12 in different parts of Greece, southern Italy, Crete. There are high frequencies of J2A M410, and it talks about specifically. So we see the different haplogroups are J carrying groups within the Minoan and Mycenaean culture. Again, when I'm looking at these pictures of Mycenaeans and the Minoans, I can't help but look at certain groups and people within the Ashkenaz and Sephardim communities, and it looks very similar. Even the sidelocks looks extremely similar. Then we're going to read this article here. It says, scientists reveal Jewish history's forgotten Turkish roots. So let's see what this is talking about and how is that significant. It states in this article that the new research suggests that most of the Jewish population of Northern and Eastern Europe, normally known as Ashkenazic Jews, are the descendants of Greeks, Iranians, and others who colonized what is now northern Turkey more than 2,000 years ago and were then converted to Judaism, and probably in the first centuries AD by Jews from Persia. So that word Greek, our descendants of Greeks, that stood out to me because, again, there's this Minoan and Mycenaean connection when looking again at the images, and even the fact that both groups carry this Y chromosome of J1 and J2. So let's keep reading, and what we find is, it says, according to research carried out by the geneticist Dr. Aran Al-Haik, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, of the University of Sheffield, over 90% of Ashkenazic ancestors come from the converted, partially Greek originating ancient community in northeast Turkey. So he's claiming, or this research is claiming, that 90% of Ashkenazic ancestry comes from a partially Greek converted originating community in northeast Turkey. That's interesting. That's interesting, especially when we're looking at the Minoans, the Mycenaeans, and the DNA they had the similar DNA. Again, they had subtraces of J2 and they had J1. So again, there's a correlation genetically between Minoans, Mycenaeans, and modern Jewish groups from Europe. Very interesting. He goes on to say, our continued research revealed that ancestry of nearly all Ashkenazic Jews could be traced to four ancient villages with remarkable names: Ishkanaz, Ashenaz, Ashkus. These names might be derived from the word Ashkenaz and are unique to northeastern Turkey. There are no other such place names anywhere in the world. However, this area had a rich history. It says until the 1st century BCE, the region was part of the Greek kingdom of Pontus. So again, we see that Greek correlation, that Greek connection. It had been established by Greek settlers in the early first millennium. Again, again, I just keep seeing that Greek connection, that that Minoan Greek connection, that Greek region. Yeah, I just keep seeing that Greek connection. It says a substantial prehistoric European ancestry amongst Ashkenazi maternal lineages. Let's see what this article has to say by Nature Communications. Let's see. It says more than 80% again of Ashkenazi mtDNA had their origins thousands of years ago in Western Europe during or before biblical times, and in some cases even before farming came to the part of the continent some 7,500 years ago. Wow. There's another article. It says let's see. So anyway, moving on from that, we have, so again, a lot of what you're seeing, whether it's Palestinians, and it's kind of weird and strange because the war between Palestine and Israel in the land now, and even they even share the same JDNA, but it's funny because they both could be, according to some of these articles and according to a lot of this research, they may both groups may be connected to Greece instead of the actual Mediterranean, that most of their DNA is connected to either Turkey or some part of Greece. That's interesting. That's very interesting when, again, you have Natuvian DNA and you have ancient Egyptian DNA of E1B1A, E1B1B that associates people that would be associated with ancient Israel with African DNA. That's interesting.